tossing grenades at windmills podcast.
So I think I want to do this in chronological order, and I think
Okay.
that there's some value in talking about your parents' families.
Uh-huh.
So let's start with Grandpa, because I think that's the more compelling one. And I think it ultimately ended up having more of an impact on your life in many ways. So tell me everything you know about your paternal grandfather and grandmother and their story and the events that ended up shaping Grandpa Lawson's life so much.
I don't know that much about them. I know that they moved around a lot, mostly to coal mining towns around Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia. My father was actually born in Virginia, I think Weiss County, Virginia. I'd have to look and see, I don't remember exactly where he was born. But he was born in Virginia. I don't know when they moved to Hazard, but I don't know a lot about my grandmother. I know my father was very devoted to his mother, because she was very devoted to him. He probably reminded her more of his dad than any of the other boys, would be my guess.
Do you know their names?
I don't remember all their names. I know
No, not all the siblings. His mother's name and his father's name.
his mother's name was Nancy Victoria Parsons, was her maiden name.
So she was Nancy Victoria Lawson?
Parsons, yeah, and then when she married, she was Lawson.
And what was his grandfather's name?
I'm not positive. I think it was Thomas Joseph Ricks, I think.
Lawson.
Part of why we named you Tom is because...
Oh, no, that's interesting. No, that's fascinating. I would love to have him as a namesake. That actually makes me a little bit more cautious about changing my first name. It's nice. No, seriously, that the other guys...
That's part of why we named you Tom, is we both had ancestors named Thomas.
Yeah, no, I'd never heard that before. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah. I think his name was Thomas Joseph, but I'd have to look. Anyway, the family, all the male members of the family worked in the coal mine, worked with the coal mine, for the coal mine in some capacity. My grandfather also worked as a sheriff at times, apparently. I don't know how many times he did that. At least once he worked as a sheriff someplace. But at the time, when my father was 3 years old, and I can never remember how many siblings there are, I always have to look at it, because I didn't know my father's family. He pretty much, by the time I came along, was cut off from his family, except for his mother. And I actually wrote her for a while when I was in high school. We wrote back and forth. She died from complications from a broken hip. She fell and broke her hip. I think she was in her 90s. And she was what my father called a holy roller, which it's primitive Baptist, I guess they call them. But he said it always creeped him out going to church. The sounds of them singing and chanting and stuff gave him the willies. So I don't know if my grandfather was religious or not. I doubt it. But at the time, when my father was 3 years old, I have met one when you guys were little. I think it was not too long after Jenny was born. So it would have been 81, 82, somewhere in there. We did a genealogy trip because your father, being LDS, so much of his genealogy had been done. He was interested in working on my family's genealogy. But somebody had done a lot of work on both sides of my family, collating stuff, especially on my mother's side. Some of that information I think is inaccurate, but at least somebody made the effort, which gives you a start. But I think there were 8 kids. My Aunt Ellen was the oldest, and then I think she had 7 brothers, of whom my father was the youngest, and he was 3 years old. And my grandfather That's another thing. My grandparents, my Aunt Ellen, when we did see her on this genealogy trip, I met Aunt Ellen and my Uncle Nick, which was weird because he moved and sounded so much like my father, but he was really tall. He was like 6'2" or 3 or something. He was really tall and skinny, and he smoked, of course. I think all the boys in the family smoked. And but it was just so weird because he was so much like my dad, but he was tall and skinny, and my dad was 5'5", so he was a little guy for those times, I guess. But he was a fierce guy. He had a brother that he called Shub, which I think is the brother just before him, who was pudgy, heavy set. And apparently he got picked on a lot at school, and my father was always getting in fist fights at school for to defend Shub. Boy, we're getting into all kinds of things.
No. Keep going.
Doing it in the morning, as I tend to freeform. But he also, and that's something I've never told you guys, I don't think, I have 3 half siblings, which I didn't realize until after Marianne started writing me. And it turned out the reason they were writing me is they were trying to locate my father and find out if they could, they figured he was about ready to die and they could get some money off of him. Which was really disappointing because I really always wanted to have a brother or a sister, or, I really wanted to meet them. And they apparently all hated me and hated my mother, blah-de-blah. It's like they blamed us we weren't the cause of the breakup, The breakup happened before he ever met my mother, so there was no shenanigans there. But part of the breakup, my mother tells me, my father never told me this directly, my mother tells me that my father always suspected that the youngest daughter, Marianne, let's see, there's Claire Nan and James, who became a lawyer, and he's the one who tried to break my father's will, which was apparently ironclad. So, and I haven't heard from him since. When I told him my father didn't want to get in touch with them, Marianne cut off talking to me, and it's like, okay, I was obviously a tool, which is really sad, but oh well. Anyway, Claire Nan and James and Marianne. And my father always suspected that Marianne was, that Shub and his wife Eulace, what a name, Eulace, Eulace, had an affair, and that Marianne was actually Shub's child. I don't know if he thought that happened couldn't have happened while he was away, because she couldn't pass Marianne off as his child if he was not in Kentucky. So, but he always suspected that Marianne wasn't his. Plus, when I was a kid, he was very, very vehement about abortion and talked about it a lot when I was a kid. And he talked about things that were just kind of to me. I would just sit and listen and react the way I do to a lot of things today, just kind of, I don't know what to say to that, because I was in grammar school and he's talking about abortion and how it should be between a woman and her doctor and nobody else's business and so on and so forth. Apparently, Eulace tried to abort Marianne. I don't know what she did to try to abort Marianne, but when I met Marianne and talked to her on the phone and was writing her for the brief period that happened, she had cerebral palsy, which I don't know if that's related, if that can be related to things that you take while you're pregnant or something, and if Eulace took something that caused Marianne to think, because I always thought cerebral palsy was a genetic thing, but I don't know. I don't know much about it. But apparently she had a very mild form of it. And again, cerebral palsy has always struck me as something, when I went to BYU, there was a guy in a wheelchair who had severe cerebral palsy, but he was in college, so his mind functioned just fine. But Marianne apparently got kept back a couple of years for being slow, which I would not associate with cerebral palsy, but again, what do I know? So, but yeah, and when I talked to her and met her, she talked really slow. So there was something that went on, possibly from however her mother tried to avoid her. So, anyway, so back to my grandparents, which is the question you originally asked me. My father was 3 years old. My grandfather at the time, I don't know what other functions he had with the mining company. I'm sure this is not the only thing he did, but he rode horseback. Apparently, he rode horseback like a demon through the woods. He liked going fast. Both my father and my grandfather were kind of wild, life-loving guys. Well, my father had a brain injury, World War II. And my grandmother, and grandfather were madly in love with each other, according to my Aunt Ellen. They were crazy about each other. Even after all of those kids, they were still crazy about each other. Madly in love, which says a lot, especially for the times. Their lives couldn't have been easy. It was never easy working at a coal mine, and especially a company town with that many kids. Anyway, they told a story about, or Aunt Ellen told me a story about her and a friend, because my grandfather had this reputation of running through the woods like a demon on his horse, that they rigged up a dummy in a tree, she and her friend, and as he was roaring through the woods on his horse, they dropped this dummy out of the tree. The horse scared the hell out of him and the horse and almost threw him. I mean, they could have killed him. They were crazy. Apparently, my grandparents were crazy people in a good way. In a good way. They were crazy about each other, and pulled pranks on each other and stuff like that. So, anyway, my grandfather was running the payroll for the mining company. Take money from the mining company to the bank and then bring receipts and stuff. So he was running the payroll for the mining company to the bank, and this guy killed him. He knew the route he took, knew he was, and I don't know if I assume he shot him, but I don't know. I really don't know the details of it. I wish my father was around to talk about this stuff more. Because I'd like to know. Anyway, what I do know is my father said that after that, he and his family grew up in abject poverty as a result of this guy murdering his dad. Because what happens in coal mining towns, if you don't have men working at the mine, they kick you out of the housing. And we all know what coal mining was like, and the whole concept of the company store and all of that. You basically serfs. You didn't own the house you lived in. You didn't. You were always in debt. So on. So. But apparently they were okay until this murder happened. And my father, he was only 3 when it happened, so I don't know how long the trial took and everything, but he was at the trial for the guy. He seemed to indicate he was at the trial for the guy, and this may be a false memory on his part, I don't know. But the whole family probably was there, and it may be something that was seared in his brain. I know that certain things are seared into my brain from that age, so you never know. But his, this guy, he said that he just wanted to kill him. His whole life, every time he'd think of that guy, he just really wanted to kill him, because being the youngest, his life was even harder. And I don't know what happened to the guy. I don't know if they executed him or just put him in prison for life or what they did. But they did catch him and put him on trial. My father's stories. Oh, and then my grandmother, because she needed a husband to help provide for and take care of all these kids. She married a guy I suspect was part of some of my father's problems when he was growing up. I suspect the guy abused the kids. I suspect he was a drunk. My father's only comment about him was that if he'd been half a man, she would have stayed with him. And she didn't. She married him for a while. They had one child, so my father has one half brother who's younger than he is. But she divorced him. So that was really unusual. I don't know if it was a formal divorce or if she just kicked him out. I think she divorced him though. So there's a whole lot I just don't know about my father's family. I do know the stories that he tells about growing up. He talked about, of course, he got all the hand-me-downs. He talked about wearing, and when we drove through there, it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's brutally beautiful, and I can imagine what it's like there in the winters. It's, driving through there, when we drove through, it was summerish, and I think it was the end of summer, and it was beautiful, and all these little kids running around barefoot, skinny little kids running around barefoot, and I just thought, I can't imagine what the people who live here go through when it's winter and all that snow falls, because my father talked about getting the hand-me-down clothes and the hand-me-down shoes, and his shoes would be several sizes too big, and they always had holes in the bottom, so he put cardboard in them to keep the snow from coming in, his shoe, or try to at least make them somewhat easier so it wasn't like he was walking barefoot in the snow. Protect his feet a little. And he walked, he always talked. We all joked about our parents saying they walked to school 5 miles in the snow, blah, blah, blah. Well, everybody's parents did then, far back then. You had anything, you had a horse, or you had a horse and buggy or something. 1916. Everybody didn't have a car. So, yeah, all our parents talked about how hard their lives were and how far they had to walk in the snow to go to school, which we laughed at. But the truth is, their lives were hard, and my father's life was hard growing up. He had nothing. He was always hungry. He was always cold. He was always getting into this fun shove.
Yes.
Anyway, when he talked about when he joined the Army, he said he lied about his age to get into the Army. And he was so grateful to them because it was the first time he had new clothes and new shoes that weren't threadbare and had holes in them and stuff that belonged to him. Had never belonged to anybody but him. That was the first time in his life. And he, they fed him. And so he loved Army life. It was really what he wanted to do the rest of his life. He was damn good at it. He was really good at it. He was a captain when he retired from the Army. But he got busted a couple of times for fighting, because he was a hothead. And he didn't go into details. One of the fights, he always thought, there's a movie called From Here to Eternity. I'm sure you've heard of it. And there's a character in that he thought was based on him because and I'm sure this is not the only time this has happened, so it's funny that my father thought this was maybe based on his experience. But he and an officer, it was basically a fist duel. They got into a fight, and they took off their shirts so that their rank wasn't apparent, because the officers and the enlisted men are not supposed to fight, right, for obvious reasons. And they got into a fight, and my father beat the hell out of this guy, and then the guy reported him for beating up his, superior officer. Because people are people, and they do things like that. Anyway.
Shut up! Copyright 2017 Red Anvil Amalgamated LLC. For more of this and other worlds, visit redanvilcreative.com.
To fight the forces of evil!